If I were to ask you the simple question of, would you consider buying a Chromebook right now? I think there's realistically 3 different answers I could get. No, maybe, and yeah, they're probably okay, right? I'm pretty solidly in the first camp, and while I understand I'm very much a computer snob, I truly believe there's at this point absolutely no reason for anybody to buy a Chromebook. Ever. So hopefully by the end of this video, you'll be convinced too. And to back up my point, let's actually compare some other similarly priced, or most of the time cheaper laptops to my glorious, fast, well-made, visually pleasing, other positive adjective, Chromebook. And even I was somewhat surprised with the results. First of all, this is not a video about how buying a cheap laptop is a bad thing and you are a bad person for not being able to afford or just not wanting to spend many hundreds or thousands of dollars on a laptop. What this video is about is that if you are going to buy a cheap laptop, do it right, because it will just be better off for everyone in the long run. With that pesky little disclaimer out of the way, let's look at the laptops that will go head to head today in my tests. First off, we have my lovely school Chromebook, which has this dumb model number I will not be saying 10 times because I'm lazy, and instead I will call it the Smadsnug. For PC laptops, we've got the ThinkPad T520, the ThinkPad P40 Yoga, and the ThinkPad T580. If you're wondering why all the computers I'm comparing are ThinkPads, it's because A, those are the PC laptops I have access to, and B, they're really solid, and they can be found for very cheap because businesses sell them off in masses. On the Mac side, I will throw in a 2020 MacBook Pro, and because I'm mean and unfair, my M3 Pro MacBook Pro. No. I am not testing the M3 MacBook Pro because I am mean and unfair, even though I am. This is a control test. It's meant to show a baseline. In my tests going against the Chromebook, I will run WebGL Aquarium, Google Octane, Speedometer 3.0, a web page loading speed, and what resolution it can play a YouTube video at. For all the real laptops, let's compare them head-to-head with Geekbench 6. I would try something like Cinebench, but Geekbench was the only CPU-based benchmark that I could find that would be able to run on Linux. Starting off with WebGL Aquarium, the Chromebook could only handle a measly 1,000 fish before significantly dropping frames. Already, the 13-year-old ThinkPad was coming ahead with 5,000 fish. The P40 was the same story, and the T580 and 2020 MacBook Pro both went up to 10,000 fish without dropping frames. Hi there, it's editing me to tell you that if you would like to look at these graphs outside of this YouTube video, or maybe send to your school board, then you can head over to data.disketkitchen.com, click on this button, and you will be able to view all the graphs individually as images. If I do comparisons like this in future videos, they will also go up on this site, so keep an eye out, because it's kind of cool. The M3 MacBook Pro made it all the way up to 25,000 fish before it even started mildly dropping frames. I included WebGL Aquarium because it's really the only way I could conceivably run any graphics benchmark on my heavily locked down district Chromebook. In fact, I was kind of surprised that they didn't block it with the network anyway. And sure, you're probably not trying to play Cyberpunk on a Chromebook, but it felt like a good, relatively basic test to run, and a good comparison. Next, I tried Google Octane, and while I'm aware that at this point it's kind of out of date and isn't actually supported by Google anymore, I felt it was kind of only fair to use a tool that falls under the Chromium project to test a Chromebook. In Octane, the T520 actually only scored slightly higher than the Chromebook, but still enough to be outside of the margin of error, and from there it was a pretty steady increase with all the other laptops. But arguably, the more useful and modern version of Octane is Browserbench's Speedometer 3.0, which being newer, can test more important functions of a web browser that's important when everything is basically just a web app now. In speedometer, the T520 once again came slightly ahead of the Chromebook, but this time it was closer, and from there the scores almost doubled. It's also important to note that this could be perceived as kind of unfair, because the computers were running different browsers. The ThinkPads were all on Firefox, the Macs on Safari, and of course the Chromebook was running Chrome. But I would argue that this is actually more fair, given each one of these computers are running the fastest browser they can, with Chrome being the slowest, with all the Google crap and memory usage, Firefox being a little bit faster, and Safari generally being regarded as one of the fastest browsers you can run, especially with Apple Silicon. So I would say that this is actually more fair than if I decided to run Microsoft Edge on the Windows PCs just because it's pre-installed. Using the computer's fastest supported browser actually shows better how the computer itself performs because it's not being bottlenecked by Chrome being slow. In the case of the Chromebook, it is being bottlenecked by Chrome being slow because Chrome is the browser for Chromebooks. And while I think these benchmarks are pretty interesting, they don't always represent real-world performance. So let's just look at how long it takes to load a web page. For this test, I just went to the New York Times, which I chose partly because it has a few ads and I think represents a typical website that an average user would be visiting. And also because that's what my mom told me to use when I asked her for a random website. And I considered the website being loaded when the little circle thing finally stopped spinning. And the results surprised me even, and that's after using a Chromebook for a while. Because it took 15 seconds to fully load the web page, with the T520 only taking a fifth of that time. Interestingly, the P40 took an extra second, with all the rest taking only 2 seconds. This is a good example of why I wanted to include my M3 MacBook Pro. It taking 2 seconds along with the 2020 MacBook Pro and the ThinkPad T580 shows that it's not a bottleneck of the computer, but just my internet speed, which is where it's valuable to include such a fast overkill computer in a test like this. This is also under the absolute best scenario because I ran all 3 of these tests very late at night when no one else was using the Wi-Fi, and so these aren't necessarily reproducible and would be impacted by other factors like Wi-Fi signal strength, network congestion, or bandwidth. But yeah, this one was really the most surprising to me. Taking a full 5 times longer to load a decently simple web page than a 13-year-old computer is frankly impressive. My last browser-based test was just playing a YouTube video, another seemingly basic task, but the Chromebook couldn't even play a YouTube video at 1080p. It could barely play a YouTube video at 720p. And to be fair, the screen isn't 1080p, it's barely 720p. So it probably doesn't matter that much, but it still seems like a relatively basic task to me and was still beat out by the 13-year-old ThinkPad. The scores with YouTube that actually matter the most are the fact that both MacBooks can play back 4K and the P40 can play 1440p. This matters because the ThinkPad P40 has a 1440p screen. And even though the MacBooks aren't technically 4K, they have these weird resolutions due to their weird aspect ratios that make it so there is a difference between 1440p and 4K with YouTube playback. The final test for all these laptops was just to see how long each one took to boot to the lock screen. Unsurprisingly, the T520 took the longest in this test, which I would mostly attribute to being the only system here to have a spinning hard drive. I also found it interesting that the boot time actually increased the newer the computer was, up to the M3 at least. Next, as a final comparison between all the real computers, I ran Geekbench 6. And I'm not going to go into the scores in this one because honestly, it's not that important, other than saying that multi-core generally matters more in productivity tasks like word processing or browsing the web. So I hope at this point you understand that there's really no reason to buy a Chromebook, literally ever. But another thing I have to add about Chromebooks is that while Google promises 10 years of updates, that technically only applies to machines made after 2023. And even if this does get updates for 10 years, I'm not sure that the hardware will last that long, given how slow it already feels after 3 and how poorly made the hardware is. This is my second Chromebook of the school year. I had to get switched out in the first week because my first one just died by itself. And this is the nicest model that my school has, and it still has some pretty bad flaws. The keyboard is terrible. It's really unresponsive to the point that I can't properly touch type because it's not sensitive enough. The screen is also really small and low resolution. It's to the point where it's hard to read text a lot of the time. The trackpad is also way too small. I don't consider myself as having massive hands, but I had to turn the sensitivity way up to be able to have it be even mildly usable. It also ruins Linux. Something that not everybody remembers is that Chrome OS is based off of Gen 2 Linux, and part of the appeal for Linux generally is that it's lightweight, it's fast, and it has a customizable interface. Chrome OS takes all of those things and just throws them out the window because you, I guess. By adding a bunch of Google garbage on top of everything and making the interface kind of ugly in my opinion, you get rid of all the lightweight speed of Linux. But the main thing that I want to address here is the main use for Chromebooks, which is of course in schools. This is a school Chromebook. Now, the usual argument for the one-to-one Chromebook to student model is that it levels the playing field, making sure that every student gets a working computer. But I've got a gripe with this point too, because what it really ends up is that everyone just gets a computer. If rather than giving every single student who doesn't necessarily need one a crappy Chromebook, we gave decent computers to the kids who don't have the money for or just don't want to use their personal laptop, a decent computer, I'm willing to bet that school districts would also save money. I have gone to a school in the past that let us use our own computers, and honestly, it worked better for everyone. The provided school computers were better, and because the school didn't have to buy a computer for everyone, the ones that they did buy for students who didn't have their own or chose not to use their own were better. And it was a benefit for students too, because, for instance, I got to use my good computer with my good design software to complete assignments. And on top of that, the Chromebook system just creates extra friction for everyone. I've had so many problems in just a few weeks of school that my librarians recognized me. My first Chromebook full-on died in just the first week of school. I missed multiple statewide test questions due to my cursor freezing, and there's just been a lot of waiting for Google Docs to load and reload. I was curious about how many people actually own a personal laptop. So, yeah, hi there. Is there any chance I could just ask you a quick market research question? Do you own a personal laptop?
Yes.
I own a personal computer.
Yes, I do. I own, I think, 3 at the moment.
No, unfortunately I don't.
Yes. Yeah. I do.
Yes.
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 Now, not all the people I asked wanted to be filmed, completely understandably, but out of the 30 total people I asked whether they owned a personal laptop, 26 of them said yes. I'm aware that this is not the whole school, it's 30 out of 1,200, but doing some quick math, if this school Chromebook costs roughly $275, that multiplied by 30 students comes out to $8,250. If the 26 students who owned a personal laptop used theirs instead, the school would save $7,150. For that, they would be able to buy a full-on MacBook Air for each student and then still have an extra $3,000 left over. And considering that they probably wouldn't buy full-on MacBook Airs and it would be something cheaper but still usable, if you account for the 1,200 students that attend my school, a much smaller fraction would need school computers, which would probably save hundreds of thousands of dollars. And on top of that, the real laptops would last longer. Sure, this data doesn't speak for every school district or even every school in my district. This is a high school, and usually younger kids are less likely to own a computer themselves. But I think my point still stands about a lot of people owning computers now. Especially with online learning during COVID, a lot of people bought personal laptops. So anyway, I think it's safe to say that Chromebooks, both at home and in education, are really just bad for everyone. They just give you a bad experience. They don't last, which creates more e-waste, and they don't even save money when you can get a vastly better used computer for the same price as a Chromebook. If you found this video interesting, then consider sharing it with someone else who might find it interesting. If you didn't find it interesting, why are you still here? Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes life is like Internet Explorer. It sucks. Roll the intro. Let's compare them head-to-head with Beakbench, trying to play Cyberpunk 2027 on a... Just don't spill it this time. Bad timing, big truck. Ow.